Okay, good afternoon. This video is for my students under the subject operating system by Ma'am Salazar. And we will be talking about the lesson 3 of our subject, which is process management. Now, what is a process all about? A central theme to the study of operating system is the concept of process. Processes are programs loaded into memory that take alternating CPU and I/O bursts. A process is either doing an input or output activity and a processing activity. To understand this point further, consider the act of printing a document using the word processor. A user may press Ctrl and letter P keys from the keyboard. And this is an example of an input burst. Inside the computer, the processor will interpret what the command Control P means. In MS Word environment, since the same keys may mean a different thing in different application software. The thinking process of the processor is a CPU burst. Upon determination of the purpose of the keyboard commands in the print dialog box will be displayed on the computer screen. And this is another I/O burst. More specifically, it is an output burst. The operating system is busy in all this activity, passing the input to the processor and sending the result to the appropriate output devices. Process concept. A process is a program in execution. For example, when we write a program in C or C++ and compile it, the compiler creates binary code. The original code and binary code are both programs. When we actually run the binary code, it becomes a process. A process is an active entity, as opposed to a program, which is considered to be passive entity. A single program can create many processes when run multiple times. So magkaiba ang definition natin ng process and program. Kasi in our definition, a process is a program in execution. Now, there are attributes or characteristics of a process. When we say attributes, these are the additional information of the process. Ayan. So, a process has following attributes. Process ID, which is the unique identifier assigned by the operating system. Process state, it can be ready, running, and etc. Process states, possible, pwede kasing si process ay nasa ready, running, waiting, blocked, or halted state. CPU register, like the program counter, CPU register must be saved and restored when a process is swapped in and out of a CPU. I/O status information. So for example, devices allocated to the process, for example, open file. Yan. So every time kasi, when a process will be executed by the processor, it should have a resource. So one of the resource na kailangan ng process is yung memory allocation. Yan. CPU scheduling information. Ito yung isang attribute pa ng process. Ano yon? For example, what is the scheduling used when processing that process? Ayan. So, for example, priority ba yung ginamit niyang scheduling? Different processes may have different priorities. For example, a short process may be assigned a low priority in the shortest job for scheduling. So, definitely, there are different process scheduling. And iba-iba din yung priorities. So, hindi natin masabi kung sining mauuna at hindi rin natin masasabi kung sino yung mahuhuli. Ayan. All of the above attributes of a process are also known as the context of the process. Ayan. And these are called context of process. And every process has its own PCB or yung tinatawag nating program control block. Example, each process will have a unique PCB. All of the above attributes are part of the PCB. So, technically, kapag mayroon kang process has a unique PCB, program control block. Ayan. So, lahat ng process mo, mayroon siyang unique identifier. Process states. Ayan. So, when we say process states, like matter in the physical sciences, processes pass through different states depending on the process model used. The alternating CPU and I/O burst of a process are sometimes referred to by some authors as the two-state process model. The process is either CPU or not in CPU. So in other words, the process is either performing processing activities or is performing a non-processing activity like input-output. The best analogy for this process state is the switch, which is either on or off. So the first model of process state is yung tinatawag nating two-state process. It's either on or off. It's either nagpa-process or di nagpa-process. May activity o walang activity. Ayan. Yun yung first na model ng process state natin. Nag-alternate between CPU and I/O burst. It's either yung process nasa loob na ng CPU or wala. Ayan. The second model state, ayan. Another famous process state model is the three-state process model, which reposes on the idea that aside from the state whereby the process is running or processing inside the CPU, the process is either waiting to get into the processor or a processor to be released by the job or process which is currently using the processor while latter is simply not ready for the CPU because of the I/O activity. Ayan. So the second model is yung tinatawag nating three-states process. Dito naman, meron namang isa pang state which is the waiting state. So technically, pag meron daw input, may activity, may ginagawa si processor kay process, and then nagkaroon ng instances na merong resource pa na kailangan yung process na yon, that process will be on the waiting state. Ayan. So, dun magkakaroon ng pangatlong state. And then after nun, if the process has already have its own resource, then papasok ulit siya kay processor, and after nun, it will be halted or released by the processor. So, tatlo yung states na pinagdadaanan niya. The new, the waiting state, and the exit state. Ayan. So, in our model, so meron tayong data, ayan, napapasok kay CPU. Ayan. And then, mag-aantay tayo ng I/O commands by the use of the I/O devices. Tama. And then yung I/O devices natin na yon, meron dapat yung memory na mag-hold sa kanya. For example, meron pang process na naka-hold kay processor. So, yung isang process, hindi pa siya makakapasok. So, nasa waiting state muna siya. Ayan. So, aantayin niya. It's either aantayin niya yung ibibigay na resource sa kanya, aantayin niya na matapos si processor dun sa naunang process, or aantayin niya na mabigyan siya ng resource. Ayan. So, yun yung pangalawang model ng state process. The more popular process state model is the five-state process model, which simply added the two states, a new and a terminated state. Ayan. So, dito naman, ito yung talagang popular process states na dinidiscuss natin. Yun yung five-state process model. So, ano yun? Ayan. Discuss muna natin yung new, ready, run, blocked, wait, and terminated. Ayan. So sa new, pag sinabi mong new yung process, in this step, the process is about to be created. Okay, create pa lang siya. Ayan. It is the program which is present in the secondary memory that will be picked up by the OS to create the process. Ayan. Siya isang program pa lang. Ayan. Which is nasa secondary memory siya at nag-aantay siya to be picked by the operating system to create the process. Ayan. After nun, pag napili na siya, ayan, mayroon tayong tinatawag na ready state. Ready to run ang ibig sabihin. After the creation of a process, the process enters the ready state. The process is loaded into the memory. The process here is ready to run and is waiting to get the CPU time for its execution. Processes that are ready for execution by the CPU are maintained in the queue for ready processes. So kapag meron ka ng memory, na load ka na sa main memory, ayan, yung process na load na sa main memory, mag-aantay na siya na ma-execute ni processor. Sa pag-aantay niya, meron tayong pilang sinusunod o yung tinatawag nating queue. Ayan. So, lahat ng process na meron ng main memory na mag-aantay sa isang pila kung saan antayin nilang i-process sila ni processor. Now, after na mapili sila ni processor, it depends on the scheduling algorithms na gagamitin ni processor. Once na mapili sila, they will be in a new state. And this is what we call running or run state. Running state. Ayan. The process is chosen by CPU for execution, and the instructions within the process are executed by any one of the available CPU cores. Ayan. So sa running state, ibig sabihin pag ang process nakapunta na sa processor, ang tawag na sa state niya is running state kasi pinaprocess na siya ni processor. Yan. Now, after all the execution is done, wala nang kailangang gawin, it will be terminated. Terminated or complete, process is killed or well as PCB is deleted. So, yung process na yon na tapos na yung execution and then the state na meron siya ngayon is terminated or tinatawag natin halted state. Ayan. Now, meron pang isang state, yun yung tinatawag ng blocked or wait or waiting state. Ano naman yon? So, sa blocked or waiting, whenever the process requests access to I/O or need input from the user or need access to a critical region, it enters the blocked or waiting state. The process continues to wait in the main memory and does not require CPU. Once the I/O operation is completed, the process goes to the ready state. Ayan. So sa pag-block state naman, kapag ang isang process nangailangan pa ng another I/O instruction or input-output instruction, papasok siya into block state. Ayan. Kasi mag-aantay siya ng input ng user. Ayan. So after ma-finish yun, yung process na yun, mapupunta ulit sa ready kasi pipila siya uli para mapili naman siya ni processor na ma-execute na siya. Ayun. So, yun yung 5 process states na mas popular na ginagamit sa operating system. So, in figure 3.0, this is a diagram of a 5-state process model. Ayan. New. Yan yung nasa secondary memory ka pa lang. Ayan, nagre-ready ka pa lang. Ayan. Ang tawag pa sa'yo ay program. Ayan. And nag-aantay ka para mapili ka ni OS to create a process. Na after you create a process, nasa ready state ka na. Nandiyan na yung meron kang resources na hawak na. And after nun, you are in a running state wherein the processor are executing the process. And then release or the exit state, halted or terminated. When once na meron kang I/O request, you are going to a block state. Ayan. And then after na ma-finish yung I.O. na yon, babalik ka ulit sa ready state for a queue. And after nun, running, and then exit halted, terminated ka. This is the most popular process states na dinidiscuss in operating system. Now, process creation and termination. Ayan. Paano ba daw na-create si process at paano siya na-terminate? Creation. Processes like humans are born. It likewise has its own death. Living organisms may be born naturally through sexual reproduction or artificially cloning. Lives may be lost, on the other hand, due to diseases, accident, suicide, or crimes. Processes inside the computer system are created under the following circumstances. So, meron tayong 4 na klase. Paano nakikreate si process? Una, yung tinatawag nating system boot up. When we say system boot up, when the power button of the computer is pressed, the computer is initialized. All the system processes that must be initialized in preparation for the loading of user applications are initialized during the booting process. Ayan. Yun yung unang creation, system boot up. Another process creation is yung tinatawag nating batch system initiation. In batch processing system, the OS makes the initiative to run the next job in the batch the moment it sees that all required resources are available. Ayan. Number 3, human user creation. Another process creation situation is when the human user decides to create a process either through a double click of an existing file shortcut on a desktop or saving a new document file on a word processor with a file name. Ayan. In both instances, a process is created in the memory. Number 4, process spawning. Ayan. Ano ba yung process spawning? In this method, a process is called by another application during execution. The summoning process is referred to as the parent processing, while the summoned process is called the child process. For example, have you experienced an instance wherein opening a file triggered the launching of an antivirus software? Ayan. This is a situation likened to be a process spawning, since the human user has no idea if a file is infected with a virus or not. Ayan. So, dun pala na-create yung process. Sa 4 na klase na yan, system boot up, initiation, human user creation, or process spawning. Now, paano naman siya na-terminate? Process termination in the computer system takes many forms. According yan kay Stallings ng 2001 na book, it gives us the following situation when a process dies or terminated. Yan. Una, normal completion. When we say normal completion, a process informs the OS that it has finished its execution. Yan. A good example is removing safely a flash disk from a USB port. Ayan. Yun yung normal completion or normal termination na tinatawag. Nag-e-end na yung process natin. Number 2, time limit exceeded. Ano yon? The process is terminated the moment it exceeds the maximum time for a user to perform input. Ayan. A good example is the email wherein the page expires due to lack of input activity after a certain period of time. Ayan. So, di ba, you need to refresh. And kapag di-refresh mo siya, tatanungin ka niya ulit ng iyong account. So, yun yung time limit exceeded. Number 3, memory unavailable. A process is terminated whenever there is insufficient memory availability than what is being required by the user application. For example, a user is trying to save a file to a limited storage space. The saving process would be terminated as a result of memory limitation. Ayan. For example, may download kang file. Ay yung memory allocation mo ay hindi na kasya yung file na yun. Hindi magpo-process yung yung download mo. Ayan, iti-terminate niya yun. Bounds violation. In a network environment, access to a common shared location is common to all users. A restricted area, on the other hand, is limited to user accounts with unlimited access rights, such as an administrator. If an ordinary user would therefore try to access a restricted location in the network, such as attempt would be foiled due to his limited access rights. The boundary he is looking into is beyond his defined scope and is therefore creating a violation. Ayan. So, yun yung tinatawag nating bounds violation. Pag once na may inaccess ka na uh, uh, hindi naman yun yung scope or yung area mo. Ayan. 5. Protection error. In protection error, this process termination event occurs when a process tries to access a protected file or a resource. A good example is saving to a write-protected disk or saving modification to a read-only file. Ayan. In the first situation, the write-protect feature must be changed to write-enable. In the second situation naman, the changes in the read-only file can be saved as using a different file name. Ayan. So, sa protection error naman, pwede kasi minsan yung file mo i-read-only lang. Para ma-access ko yon, ma-access ko naman siya. Kaya lang yung yung editable version nun, hindi ko magagawa. So, I need to rename that file para magamit ko siya. Ayan. So, protection error naman ang tawag doon. Time overrun. Arithmetic error muna. Arithmetic error. This type of process terminating error occurs whenever an illegal computation is made in the computer system, such as undefined computation or an extremely large numerical input to a limited capacity. Yan. Number 7, time overrun. Occurs when a process has consumed the maximum time waiting for an event to happen. Yan. A good example is the remote shutdown of a computer in an internet cafe. A game player is normally warned of the remaining minutes based on his rental time. If he does not inform the system administrator for a time extension, then the system would be terminated despite his unfinished game. Ayan. So, yun naman yung time overrun. I/O failure. When we say I/O failure, occurs when an error is encountered in an I/O device. An example is formatting a damaged disk. The format process is terminated and the user is informed that the disk is severely damaged and can no longer be formatted. Yan. So sa input-output failure naman yon. Invalid instruction. When we say invalid instruction, the process executes non-existent instruction. To simplify our understanding of this process termination event, consider compiling a program with an undeclared variable. Ayan. Halimbawa, variable z. Because of an undeclared variable z in one more lines of the program, the compilation of the program would be halted. Ayan. So, yun naman yung invalid instruction. Privilege instruction. These are instructions which are considered reserved words and are therefore limited for system users, such as the OS. A good example is using getch or getch in C++ programming language as a variable name. This variable name would not be permitted as it is regarded as reserved instruction for the C++ programming language. Yun naman yung sa privilege instruction. So, hindi mag-terminate yung process mo. Pag once na gumamit ka ng certain keywords. na hindi naman pwede. Data misuse. When we say data misuse, occurs when data is of the wrong type or not properly initialized in the system. A good example is the use of an automated teller machine. Ayan, the ATM. It requires a personal identification number or yung tinatawag nating PIN as a proof of that the person is using the card or the actual owner. Ayan. The PIN cannot accept an empty or null value. The process to inquire the balance or withdraw money is terminated as a result of a null PIN value. So every time, kasi pag magamit tayo ng ATM, tinatanong tayo ano yung PIN natin. Now, kapag wala tayong nalagay na PIN, hindi ina-accept yon ng ATM. Ayan. So, your access will be terminated and the process will die. Ayan. Operator or OS intervention. This is common in a deadlock situation. When a human user considers the system to have hanged, he then restarts the computer, thus terminating all the process in the system. Ayan. So pag halimbawa, yung computer unit natin or yung system natin naghang, ayaw niya nang gumana. So ang gagawin natin is to restart the PC. Ipupush mo lang ulit yung button and then i-on mo and then magpa-process na yung system unit mo. Ayan. So, technically, yung PC mo, mati-terminate. Yung process na naman nandun, mati-terminate. So, yung tinatawag nating operator or OS intervention. 13. Parent termination. When a parent process terminates, the child process or children processes are likewise terminated in what is termed as cascading termination. The best example is a word processor with several active documents. The word processor acts as the parent process while the documents under it are the children processes. When the word processor is closed or terminated, the children processes are likewise terminated. Ayan. So, for example, ang daming mong nakabukas na word. Yan, na file. Pag once na in-exit mo yung parent na Word file, yung Microsoft Word, lahat ng mga files mo na naka-open din, i-ask ka na niya kung i-save mo yung files na yun. Kasi technically, lahat din yun ay mag-terminate. Parent request. A parent process has the authority to terminate any of its offspring process. So, parent termination nga kanina, diba? So, pag once ni-request, automatic, pag once na ang parent nag-request ng termination, lahat ng child processes ay mati-terminate. Process threads. An important topic under the process concept is the concept threads. Threads are defined by some authors are small portions of a given process. If a process is analogous to an individual, the same person is composed of different bodily systems, such as digestive system, reproductive system, and etc. Threads are synonymous to this body system, like the different body system which are need of oxygen, nutrients, etc. The threads share the same characteristic to that of a process. It has its own thread states, which is similar to process states, also known as mini processes or lightweight processes. Threads are useful since a process can have multiple threads running independently and simultaneously. Ayan. A thread is a path of execution within a process. A process can contain multiple threads. So when you have a process, it can contain one or more threads. And that thread is a path of execution, ayan, of a process. Why multithreading? Ayan. A thread is also known as a lightweight process. So the idea is to achieve parallelism by dividing a process into multiple threads. Ayan. Para mas lightweight nga, para mas magaan i-process. Ayan. For example, in a browser, multiple tabs can be different threads. MS Word uses multiple threads. One thread to format the text, another thread to process input, etc. Ayan. So, mas maganda yung multi-threading. Now, process versus thread. The difference between process and thread. Kasi magkaiba sila. Hindi sila parehas. The primary difference is that threads within the same process run in a shared memory space, while processes run in separate memory spaces. So pag ang process nag-run, nasa isang separate memory siya. While on the other hand, yung threads within the same process is run in a shared memory space. Ayan. Threads are not independent of one another like processes are. And as a result, thread shares with other threads their code section, data section, and OS resource. But like process, a thread has its own program counter, register, and stack space. Ayan. Advantages of thread over process. So what is the advantage of thread over process? Una, responsiveness. If the process is divided into multiple threads, if one thread completes its execution, then its output can be immediately returned. Number two, faster context switch. Context switch time between the threads is lower compared to process context switch. Process context switching requires more overhead from the CPU. Effective utilization of multiprocessor system. If we have multiple threads in a single process, then we can schedule multiple threads on a multiple processor. This will make process execution faster. 4. Resource sharing. Resources like code, data, and files can be shared among all threads within a process. Note, stack and registers can't be shared among the threads kasi each thread has its own stack and register. Ayan. So, yun lang yung hindi nila pwedeng i-share, yung stack and yung register. Di ba yung register na discuss natin yan noong nakaraan? Limit and base register. Ayan. Number 5, communication. Communication between multiple thread is easier as the thread shares common address space. Yan. While in process, we have to follow some specific communication technique for communication between two processes. Okay, that would be all. I hope na meron kayong lesson learned in this topic. Now, if you have questions, please you direct message me in our group, and then okay naman po you if you want, comment down sa video na to yung question nyo, and this will be uploaded for our next session. Thank you. ICT 21 and 22. Ayan. Maraming salamat. And see you on our next live session. Thank you very much.